should have known something was wrong the moment the waitress stopped smiling. It was my 72nd birthday, and my family had insisted on celebrating at a little Italian restaurant by the river, the kind with soft yellow lights, clinking wine glasses, and music that makes you think life is sweeter than it really is. My son Daniel had chosen the place. "Mom, you deserve something special," he'd said, squeezing my shoulder as if he still needed permission to take care of me. I remember thinking how tall he looked that night. When did he start towering over me like that? When did my boy with scraped knees and missing front teeth turn into a man who made dinner reservations without asking? My daughter-in-law, Meredith, sat across from me. Perfect posture, perfect lipstick, perfect smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Beside her, my granddaughter Lily was scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing up to say, "Happy birthday, Grandma," in that distracted teenage tone that sounds more like obligation than affection. Still, I was happy. I truly was. The waiter brought out a slice of chocolate cake with a single candle. Daniel raised his glass. "To Mom," he said, "for everything." Everyone lifted their drinks. Mine was a pale pink cocktail Meredith had insisted I try. "It's light," she told me. "You'll love it." I don't usually drink much. At my age, even half a glass makes the room tilt a little, but I didn't want to spoil the mood. I wrapped my fingers around the stem, feeling the cool glass against my skin. That's when she appeared. Not our server. This was a younger woman, maybe mid-20s, apron slightly wrinkled, dark hair pulled back in a rushed ponytail. She approached quietly, almost nervously. "Ma'am," she said, leaning closer than necessary. I smiled politely, thinking she was about to ask if everything tasted all right. Instead, she slid something small under my napkin. Her fingers trembled. "Please," she whispered, barely moving her lips, "don't drink that." And then she walked away, just like that. My heart didn't race at first. It paused, as if it had forgotten how to beat. I stared at my glass. The condensation on the outside looked ordinary. The pink liquid shimmered under the candlelight. Nothing seemed unusual. Around me, my family laughed at something Daniel had said. The world hadn't shifted, but my hands had. They were shaking. Slowly, I unfolded the napkin. A small piece of receipt paper stared back at me. 3 words. Don't trust them. The air in my lungs turned heavy. Them. Who was them? I looked at Daniel, my son, who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on ants. Meredith, who always brought store-bought pies and claimed she baked them herself. Lily, who once told me I was her favorite person because I never yelled. What was this girl trying to say? My eyes drifted back to the drink. Had she meant it as a joke? A misunderstanding? Was it the wrong table? Or was it something else? I became aware of something I hadn't noticed before. Meredith was watching me. Not openly, not obviously, but her gaze flicked toward my glass, then back to my face, then back to the glass again. Daniel leaned forward. "Mom, you okay?" I forced a smile. Oh yes, sweetheart, just taking it all in. The candle flickered, my fingers tightened around the stem, and for the first time in my life, I hesitated to toast my own birthday. Because deep down, beneath the music and laughter, I felt it. Something was terribly wrong, and I hadn't even lifted the glass yet. I have learned something about instincts at my age. They do not shout, they whisper. And mine was whispering so softly that I almost ignored it. Daniel was still holding his glass in the air. Mom, he repeated, smiling, though there was something tight around his eyes now. We're waiting, waiting. For what? For me to drink, for me to toast, for me to prove that I trusted them. I forced a small laugh and lifted my glass slightly, but I didn't bring it to my lips. Instead, I glanced down at the note again, shielding it with my hand. Don't trust them. The waitress had looked frightened, not mischievous, not dramatic, frightened. I told myself I was being foolish. Perhaps she had mistaken our table for another. Perhaps someone at the bar had slipped something into a drink and she panicked. Perhaps this had nothing to do with me at all. But then I noticed something else. Meredith hadn't touched her own wine. It sat full and untouched in front of her. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, it's just a sip, just a sip. My hand trembled slightly. The candle's reflection danced in the pink liquid, distorting into strange shapes. And that's when something strange happened. Lily reached across the table and grabbed a breadstick from the basket, knocking her elbow lightly against my arm. My glass wobbled, not enough to spill, but enough to make everyone lean in. Oh, Meredith gasped. Daniel quickly steadied the base of the glass with his hand. Careful, Lil. His fingers lingered on the stem longer than necessary. Why? I smiled at Lily. Clumsy runs in the family, I teased gently. And then, without fully deciding to do it, without even thinking it through, I set my glass down. Actually, I said softly, I think I'll try yours instead. The words surprised even me. Meredith blinked. Mine. Yes, dear, that looks lighter. This one seems sweet. Her face changed. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I noticed. A flicker. A pause. Daniel laughed. Mom, you always change your mind. I've earned the right, I said lightly. Before Meredith could object, I reached across and switched our glasses. The room seemed to shrink. Daniel's smile faded just a fraction. Meredith's hand froze midair. No, that's fine, she started. But I had already lifted the other glass, the one that had been in front of her, and I took a small sip. It tasted like ordinary white wine. Dry, sharp, harmless. I nodded approvingly. Much better. Meredith stared at the pink cocktail now sitting in front of her. Her fingers hovered near it, but did not touch. Go ahead, I said gently. It's delicious, you said. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Daniel chuckled, a little too loudly. Come on, Mer. Don't be dramatic, dramatic. Was she? Or was I? Meredith slowly wrapped her fingers around the stem of the pink drink. I watched her knuckles whiten, and then, as if she were forcing herself to prove something, she lifted it and took a sip. Just a small one. She swallowed. Everything seemed normal for exactly 3 minutes. We returned to small talk. Lily showed me a picture of her school project. Daniel asked about my garden. The restaurant music hummed softly in the background. Then Meredith blinked. Once, twice. She pressed her hand against her temple. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked casually. She began, her voice thinner than before. "I feel," her sentence never finished. Because 5 minutes after that, Waitress slipped me the note. Meredith's wine glass shattered against the floor, and she collapsed forward onto the table. I have never forgotten the sound of her body hitting the table. It wasn't loud, just final. The laughter in the restaurant snapped into silence. Plates stopped clinking. Someone gasped. Lily screamed, high and sharp, the kind of sound that cuts straight through a mother's chest. "Meredith," Daniel shouted, already out of his chair. Her face had gone pale, not fainting pale, but gray. Her eyes fluttered strangely, unfocused, like she was trying to look through us instead of at us. For a split second, I forgot about the note, forgot about the glass, forgot about everything except the simple, human panic of watching someone collapse. "Call 911. Someone yelled from another table. The young waitress, the same one, appeared almost instantly. Not surprised, prepared. She slid beside Meredith and checked her pulse with steady fingers. "Too steady. Ambulance is on the way," she said quickly, her voice calm but tight. Daniel was shaking Meredith's shoulders. "Baby, talk to me. Come on." Lily was crying now, clutching my arm so tightly I could feel her nails digging into my skin. "Grandma, what's happening?" What was happening? My mind moved slowly, like it was pushing through thick fog. Meredith had taken one sip, just one. The pink drink sat in front of her, barely touched. I stared at it. My stomach twisted. The waitress looked at me then. Not at Meredith. At me. And in that glance, something passed between us, something heavy and knowing. She knew. She had known. Paramedics rushed in within minutes, lifting Meredith onto a stretcher. Daniel followed them, his face drained of color. Lily hesitated, torn between staying with me and running after her mother. "Go," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "Be with her." And just like that, I was left alone at the table, alone with the cake, alone with the candle still burning, alone with the glass. The restaurant manager approached, apologizing profusely, offering explanations about possible food reactions, allergic responses, dehydration, words that floated around me without landing. Allergic reaction. That would be simple, clean. But the waitress remained nearby, watching carefully. When the room finally cleared, she stepped closer again. "You didn't drink it," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "No," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Why?" She hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I saw someone at your table earlier," she whispered. before you arrived." My heart thudded painfully. "Who? A man, not your server. He spoke to your son briefly near the bar." "My son?" I shook my head slowly. "That's not possible." "I was refilling water glasses," she continued. "I saw him slip something small into that pink cocktail when no one was looking. I thought maybe it was sugar or something harmless. But then I saw the look on his face." "What look?" "Not kind," she said simply. The room seemed to tilt. "My son would never." "Would he? Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked, my voice barely holding together. "I wasn't sure," she admitted. "And I was afraid I'd lose my job if I accused someone without proof. But when I saw you about to drink it," she swallowed, "I couldn't stay quiet." My hands folded tightly in my lap. A stranger had risked her job for me. And my own family. My mind drifted back to Daniel's fingers lingering on the glass, Meredith's hesitation, the way they watched me. No, no, no. There had to be another explanation. There had to be. The waitress touched my arm gently. "Are you safe going home?" Safe. The word echoed strangely in my ears. "I think so," I said. But as I stood up, I noticed something I hadn't before. Daniel had paid the bill before the cake was even brought out. Everything had been arranged in advance, and for the first time in 72 years, I wondered whether this birthday dinner had been a celebration at all, or something else entirely. The ride home that night felt longer than any journey I had ever taken. Daniel insisted on driving me back after we left the hospital. Meredith was stable, they said. Possible reaction, the doctor called it. We're running tests. No one used the word poison. No one needed to. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly. The knuckles were white, just like Meredith's had been when she held that glass. "I can't believe this happened," he muttered, eyes fixed on the road. "Some restaurants just don't handle ingredients properly." "Yes," I said softly. "That must be it. Must be." The silence between us felt unnatural. When Daniel was little, he used to fill silence with questions. Why is the sky blue? Why do birds sleep? Why do people lie? Now he said nothing. When we pulled into my driveway, he didn't turn off the engine right away. The headlights washed across the front of my little house. The porch swing herald built for me 20 years ago. The rose bushes I still trimmed myself. "You scared me tonight, Mom," he finally said. "I scared you. When you switched the glasses like that. It was strange, strange." I folded my hands in my lap. "At my age, I'm allowed to be strange." He gave a tight smile, but didn't laugh. Then he looked at me, not like a son looks at his mother, like someone trying to measure something. "You didn't think," he hesitated. "You didn't think we'd ever hurt you, did you?" There it was. Not "Are you okay?" Not "I'm sorry this happened," but that. I forced myself to meet his eyes. Of course not. The relief that flashed across his face was too quick, too sharp. "Good," he said. He leaned over and kissed my cheek. His lips were cold. "Get some rest. I'll call you tomorrow." As I stepped out of the car, I felt his gaze lingering on my back until I reached the front door. Inside, the house felt different. Not unsafe, but unsettled. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, something I hadn't done so carefully in years. Then I walked slowly to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still trembling. I sat at the table and unfolded the little receipt paper again. Don't trust them. Them. Was it Daniel? Meredith? Someone else entirely? My mind replayed the waitress's words. A man spoke to your son near the bar. What man? Daniel knew many people. Business acquaintances. Neighbors. Old friends. But why would someone slip something into my drink? Unless it wasn't meant for me. The thought struck so suddenly that I nearly dropped the paper. What if the drink had been prepared for someone else? What if the target had been Meredith? Or Daniel? Or no? That didn't make sense. I stood up and walked to the small desk in the hallway. From the top drawer, I pulled out something I hadn't looked at in months. My will. I had updated it recently, quietly, without telling anyone. After Harold passed, Daniel had gently suggested I simplify things. Sell the house, move in with them, combine assets. I wasn't ready, so I had made a decision of my own, and I hadn't told them. My house, my land, my savings, they were no longer going where everyone assumed. If someone knew that, if someone had found out, a chill crawled up my spine. I sank back into the chair, heart pounding. Had tonight been an accident? Or had someone been trying to make sure I never had the chance to change anything again? Outside, a car engine idled briefly in the darkness. I froze. The headlights swept across my curtains once more. And then they disappeared. I didn't sleep that night. At my age, sleep is already a fragile thing. It comes softly and leaves quickly. But that night, it never came at all. Every creak of the house sounded like a footstep. Every passing car felt like someone watching. Around 2 a.m, I gave up pretending. I wrapped Harold's old knitted shawl around my shoulders and sat by the living room window, staring out at the quiet street. I kept replaying Daniel's question. You didn't think we'd ever hurt you, did you? Why ask that unless the thought had crossed his mind too? Or worse, unless he feared it had crossed mine. I've raised 3 children. I know the difference between guilt and worry. Worry leans forward. Guilt leans back. Daniel had leaned back. By dawn, I made a decision. I would not confront him. Not yet. Instead, I would gather facts. After breakfast, I called the restaurant and asked to speak to the manager. I kept my voice gentle, grandmotherly, harmless. I was the lady whose daughter-in-law fainted last night, I said. He recognized me immediately. Apologies poured out again. Assurances. Updates. The police had been notified because of the suspicious substance found in the glass. Suspicious substance. My heart tightened. What substance? I asked carefully. We don't have confirmation yet, he replied. But the hospital ran preliminary tests. It appears there was a sedative mixed into the cocktail. Sedative, not poison. Not lethal, at least not immediately. My mind shifted. A sedative would not kill, but it would incapacitate, make someone vulnerable, dependent, unable to make decisions, unable to sign documents, unable to owe. The thought landed like a stone in my stomach. What had Daniel asked me last week? Mom, maybe we should go over your paperwork soon, just to make sure everything's in order. I had laughed it off, told him I wasn't going anywhere. The manager's voice pulled me back. The police would like to speak to everyone at the table. Of course, I said softly. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. If the drink had been meant for me, a sedative would make me dizzy, confused, possibly unconscious. Someone could drive me home, say I wasn't feeling well, perhaps convince me to sign something while disoriented, or claim later that I was mentally declining. It wouldn't take much at my age. A few stories about forgetfulness, a few medical notes, and suddenly a court might believe I wasn't capable of managing my own affairs. I felt sick, not from fear, from disappointment. I remembered Daniel at 5 years old, clutching my apron while I baked pies. "I'll always take care of you, Mommy," he used to say. Children mean those promises. Adults sometimes reinterpret them. The phone rang around noon. It was Daniel. "How are you feeling?" he asked quickly. "Perfectly fine," I replied. A pause. "They found something in the drink," he said carefully. "The police think someone at the bar might have been fooling around, maybe targeting random tables." "Maybe," I echoed. Another pause. "You didn't drink much, did you?" "No." Relief again. Too much relief. I closed my eyes. "Daniel," I said gently, "when were you planning to tell me about the refinancing paperwork?" Silence. Real silence this time, the kind that exposes truth. "Mom, what are you talking about?" But his voice had changed. And in that moment, I knew. The sedative hadn't been meant for Meredith. It had been meant for me. And the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing that somewhere along the way, my own son had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an obstacle. There is a particular kind of pain that doesn't make you cry. It makes you very, very calm. After I asked Daniel about the refinancing paperwork, the line stayed silent long enough for me to hear his breathing change. "Mom," he finally said, slower now, measured. "We were just exploring options. It's normal. You're not getting any younger." There it was. Not concern. Assessment. "I see," I replied gently. "And you thought a sedative might help me consider those options." The sharp inhale on the other end told me more than any confession could. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "Why would you even suggest that?" "Because," I said softly, "someone put something in my drink." Another pause. Then the defensive tone returned. "The police said it could have been anyone." "Yes," I agreed. "It could have." I let the silence stretch this time. He filled it quickly. "Mom, you're overthinking this. Meredith collapsed, not you. If anything, she was the victim." Victim. The word echoed strangely. Was she? Or had she simply been the wrong person at the wrong time? "I'll talk to you later," I said calmly. Before he could respond, I hung up. My hands weren't shaking anymore. That frightened me more than the shaking had, because when fear disappears and calm takes its place, it means something inside you has shifted. That afternoon, I drove to the bank. I didn't tell anyone. The manager, Mr. Alvarez, has known me for years. He used to attend church with Harold and me before his wife passed. He greeted me warmly, but his smile faded when he saw my expression. "Everything all right, Mrs. Whitmore? I'd like to review every document with my name on it," I said. "Every trust, every authorization, every power of attorney, every beneficiary." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Of course." As we went through the files, my stomach tightened. 2 weeks ago, a request had been made to add Daniel as a secondary signatory on one of my accounts. It hadn't gone through, thankfully, because it required my in-person signature. "I didn't request this," I said quietly. Mr. Alvarez studied the paperwork. "It was submitted online. Online. I don't even remember the password to my email half the time. And yet somehow, someone had access." "Who has my social security number on file?" I asked. "Your immediate family," he answered carefully. "Of course, family." I left the bank with copies of everything, not because I wanted to build a case, but because I needed proof for myself that I wasn't imagining this. When I arrived home, there was a car parked across the street, not moving, just sitting there. I didn't recognize it. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps not. I walked inside and locked the door. For the first time since Harold passed, the house felt fragile. Not physically, emotionally. I walked to the fireplace and picked up the framed photo of Daniel at his high school graduation. His arm wrapped around my shoulders, his smile wide and proud. When did love turn into calculation? Or had I simply been too trusting to notice? The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A message from Meredith. Short: "Mom, we need to talk." Not "Are you okay?" Not "I'm sorry," just that. I stared at the screen, because suddenly I wasn't sure which scared me more, that they had tried to control my future, or that they believed I was too weak to fight back, and I hadn't even told them the most important part yet. The will they thought they were protecting was no longer written in their favor. When you reach my age, you realize something important about secrets. They don't stay buried because they're powerful. They stay buried because they're painful. Meredith came over the next morning, alone. That surprised me. She stood on my porch looking smaller than usual. No perfect lipstick, no polished smile, just pale skin and tired eyes. "I didn't tell Daniel I was coming," she said quietly when I opened the door. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat at the kitchen table where Daniel used to do his homework. The same table where Harold and I once planned our retirement. Funny how one piece of wood can hold so many different versions of a family. Meredith folded her hands tightly. "I know what you're thinking," she began. Do you? I asked gently. Her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Not calculation, fear. Daniel didn't put anything in your drink, she said quickly. I swear. I watched her carefully. But you know something, she nodded. My heart sank. Tell me, she swallowed hard. Daniel's been under a lot of pressure. The business hasn't been doing well. He made some bad investments last year. We're not in a good place financially. I had suspected something like that, but that doesn't explain a sedative, I said softly. Her voice dropped lower. He met with someone recently, a financial advisor, the kind who promises solutions when people are desperate. Desperate people do foolish things. I overheard them once, she continued. The man said if your assets were consolidated, if your house was leveraged, it could save everything. Leveraged. Such a polite word for losing something. And Daniel agreed, I asked. He said you'd understand, that you always sacrifice for family. The words pierced deeper than I expected. I had sacrificed. I worked 2 jobs when Harold was ill. I sold my jewelry to help Daniel start his first business. I never complained, because that's what mothers do. But there's a difference between helping and being handled. I didn't know about the drink, Meredith whispered. I thought dinner was just dinner. When you switched glasses, I thought you were being playful. Her voice cracked. I never imagined, neither had I, the silence stretched between us. Do you believe Daniel would hurt you? She asked finally. That question hurt more than any accusation. I believe, I said slowly, that fear makes people justify things they would never consider otherwise. Her shoulders trembled slightly. The police questioned him, she admitted, about the man at the bar. And they can't find him. Of course they can't. People who operate in shadows rarely leave names behind. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. I don't want to destroy my son, I said. She looked up sharply. But I will not let him destroy himself either. Tears slipped down her cheeks. What are you going to do? I stood up slowly and walked to the hallway desk. From the drawer, I pulled out the envelope, the updated will. I was going to surprise them at Christmas, I said softly. I had planned to leave this house to a foundation, one that helps widows keep their homes. Meredith's eyes widened. I didn't tell Daniel because I wanted to see if he still valued me without expectation. I placed the envelope back into the drawer. Now, I continued, I see the test was never for him. It was for you, she whispered. I nodded, because in that restaurant, when the glass switched hands, something else switched too. Not ownership, not power, clarity. And I had just begun to understand the real danger wasn't losing my house. It was losing my son to someone who saw him as easy to manipulate. But what I discovered later, that week proved this story was far from over. The police called 3 days later. By then, the house felt too quiet, too still, like it was waiting for something to happen. Mrs. Whitmore. The detective's voice came through steady and polite. We've identified the man who was seen near your table. My fingers tightened around the phone, and he has a history of financial fraud, targeting elderly individuals. He approaches family members first. The room seemed to shrink. Family members, I repeated. Yes, ma'am. He typically convinces relatives that he can solve financial difficulties quickly by accelerating inheritance processes or leveraging property assets. Accelerating inheritance. Such an elegant phrase for something so ugly. Did my son hire him? I asked quietly. There was a pause. Your son met with him twice, the detective said carefully. We have surveillance footage, but we don't have proof your son knew about the sedative. Knew about it. That distinction mattered. Has this man done this before? I asked. Yes. In some cases, the elderly parent was made temporarily incapacitated through legal pressure or medical confusion, and assets were signed over under questionable circumstances. My breath caught. He profits by taking a percentage, the detective continued. Once the paperwork is done, he disappears. And the families, by the time they realize what happened, it's too late. I thanked him and hung up. For a long time, I simply stood there. Daniel hadn't tried to kill me, but he had allowed someone into our lives who was capable of harming me. And that, in its own way, felt just as heavy. That evening, Daniel showed up unannounced. His eyes were red, not from anger, from shame. I know you spoke to the police, he said, as soon as I opened the door. I did. He stepped inside slowly, like a boy approaching a principal's office. I didn't know about the drink, he said immediately. I swear to you, Mom, I thought he was just helping me restructure debt. He said, if we could show the bank stronger collateral, your house included, we could avoid bankruptcy. Without asking me, I said gently. I was going to ask, he insisted. After dinner, I didn't want you to say no before I explained. As if persuasion were easier when someone is dizzy. Tears slid down his face. I was drowning, he whispered. I didn't know what else to do. I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't a villain. He was scared. And scared people sometimes reach for hands that pull them deeper instead of lifting them up. You forgot something, I said softly. What? You are not alone. He broke then, collapsed into a chair, shoulders shaking the way they used to when he scraped his knees on the driveway as a child. I'm sorry, he kept repeating. I'm so sorry. I walked over and placed my hand on his head, just like I did when he was small. I will not let anyone use you, I said quietly. Not even yourself. He looked up at me, confused. I'm meeting with that detective tomorrow, I continued. And you're coming with me. His face paled. Mom, you made a mistake, I said firmly. Now you will help fix it. Because forgiveness does not mean pretending nothing happened. It means choosing to rebuild brick by brick, with honesty. And as Daniel nodded slowly, I realized the worst thing that almost happened that night wasn't the sedative. It was the distance growing between a mother and her son, and that distance could still be closed, but only if we were brave enough to face what came next. The next morning felt heavier than the night of my birthday. Not because I was afraid anymore, but because truth has weight, and we were about to carry it together. Daniel drove us to the police station. This time, he didn't grip the steering wheel like it was his only anchor. He looked tired, humbled, quieter than I had ever seen him. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said as we parked. "I know," I replied, and I did know. That didn't excuse him, but it explained him. Inside, the detective laid everything out clearly. The so-called financial advisor had been under investigation for months. He specialized in approaching adult children who were struggling financially. He painted parents as assets sitting idle. He offered fast solutions, quiet transfers, legal shortcuts wrapped in polished language. Daniel listened without interrupting. When the detective showed him still images from the restaurant security camera, the man leaning close, whispering near the bar, Daniel's face changed. "That's when he told me to make sure you drank the cocktail," Daniel admitted quietly. My chest tightened. "What exactly did he say?" the detective asked. "He said it would calm her nerves before the paperwork discussion," Daniel replied. "He told me sometimes older people get emotional when talking about finances." Older people. I let that phrase pass through me without reacting. "And you believed him?" the detective pressed. Daniel swallowed. "I wanted to." There it was. Desperation makes lies feel reasonable. The detective explained that lab tests confirmed the drink contained a strong sedative. Not enough to cause lasting harm, but enough to cause confusion and impaired judgment for several hours. "It's a manipulation tactic," he said. "We've seen it before." I sat very still, because suddenly I understood something clearly. The drink wasn't about harming my body. It was about silencing my voice. When we left the station, Daniel didn't speak for several minutes. Finally, he said, "I could have lost you." "Yes," I answered calmly, "and I almost lost myself." That part surprised me. We stopped at a small park on the way home, the same park where I used to push him on the swings. He walked to the bench and sat down, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground. "I was ashamed to tell you how bad things had gotten," he admitted. "I didn't want to look like a failure." "Oh, sweetheart," I said softly, sitting beside him. "Failure is not falling, it's hiding." He wiped his face with his sleeve, like he used to do as a boy. "I don't want your house," he said finally. "I don't want anything that makes you feel unsafe." I studied him carefully. For the first time since that dinner, his words didn't feel rehearsed. They felt raw. "I've already changed my will," I told him quietly. He stiffened slightly. "I know," I continued gently, "and I won't apologize for protecting what your father and I built." He nodded. "I don't deserve it anyway," he said. That's when I reached for his hand. "This was never about deserving," I told him. "It was about trust." The wind moved softly through the trees above us. "And trust," I added, "can be rebuilt, but not with shortcuts." Daniel squeezed my hand. For the first time since my birthday, I felt something shift back into place. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to breathe, because sometimes the real miracle isn't avoiding betrayal. It's stopping it before it destroys everything. And as we sat there together in that quiet park, I realized my 72nd birthday hadn't nearly ended my life. It had saved my son's soul. I blew out the birthday candle 3 days late, not in a restaurant filled with strangers, but at my own kitchen table. Daniel and Meredith sat across from me. Lily had insisted on baking the cake herself this time. It leaned slightly to one side and had far too much frosting, which made it perfect. No pink cocktails, just tea. Simple, honest tea. The investigation moved quickly after our statement. The man who approached Daniel was arrested on multiple charges. There were other families, other dinners, other solutions that nearly became disasters. When the detective called to tell me, I felt relief, but not triumph, because this story was never about catching a criminal. It was about confronting something much closer. Fear, pride, silence. Daniel had started meeting with a legitimate financial counselor. One I chose. One who spoke plainly and never once referred to me as an asset. Meredith apologized more than once, not for causing harm, but for not asking questions sooner, and I forgave her, fully, because families are not destroyed by mistakes. They are destroyed by secrets. A week after everything settled, Daniel came over alone again. He stood in my living room, looking around at the framed photos and old furniture like he was seeing it for the first time. I forgot this was built by hand, he said, touching the edge of Harold's bookshelf. Yes, I smiled. Your father believed anything worth having was worth building slowly. Daniel nodded. I was trying to build something fast, he admitted, and I almost tore down the one thing that was steady. I reached for his face the way I used to when he was small. You are not my retirement plan, I told him gently, and I am not your emergency fund. A small, embarrassed smile tugged at his mouth. We are family, I continued, which means we ask, we don't assume. He pulled me into a hug then, not a polite one, a real one, the kind where the shoulders soften and the breath slows. And in that moment, I knew something important. That waitress didn't just save me from a drink, she saved us from becoming strangers. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat alone by the fireplace and thought about how close everything came to breaking. It would have been easy to let anger take over, easy to rewrite my will out of bitterness, easy to shut my door and say, you betrayed me. But love, real love, isn't blind. It sees clearly and still chooses to stay. I kept my will the way it is, not as punishment, but as protection. Because independence is not selfish at my age, it is wisdom. And Daniel knows now that if he ever needs help, all he has to do is ask. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing isn't a stranger slipping something into your glass. It's believing you have to solve everything alone. So, if there's one thing I learned on my 72nd birthday, it's this. Guard your voice, guard your dignity, but never stop guarding your family, even from the mistakes they don't yet see. And that, my dear, was the real gift I received that night. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.